Melanie Joly was not expecting this.
I do want to, though, based on what you just said, in combination with what we heard from Howard Lutnick, ask you about the prospect of one. I understand that you don't want to, disclose the details of the negotiations, but do I take from what you just said and what we heard from the Prime Minister that there won't be any deal on autos anytime soon? Howard Lutnick was pretty much explicit that Canada, he said, should come second to the United States, that maybe they'll continue buying parts, but nothing really beyond that. Is that your understanding? And if so, how consequential is that?
Well, I think the only person in the U.S. administration that decides is the president himself. So you saw a positive meeting this week between the Prime Minister and the President. The tone was respectful, and obviously the President directed his team to work with our team to make sure ultimately that we'll land on a deal. And the challenge that the Prime Minister of Canada has, and any leaders in the world have, is to attract the attention, to get the attention from the president, who has many other things to deal with, including a ceasefire in the Middle East. So that's what Prime Minister Carney was able to do. Meanwhile, of course, I, like you, heard the comments from the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and my message to Canadians, particularly Canadians and workers working in the auto sector, is we will fight for every single job in the auto sector, because these are our jobs, these are Canadian jobs, and we believe in the sector.
You announced this week in a speech that you delivered the sort of main tenets of how you envision the industrial policy for this country to take shape over the term of your government. And I wanted to drill down into a little bit of what you put forward, in particular against the backdrop of what's going on with the United States, because at that meeting, a number of people from your government communicated to reporters that the prospect, for example, of reviving Keystone was brought up in order to reduce steel and aluminum tariffs. Your policy that you announced this week is very much focused on generating a more robust domestic supply chain and domestic capacity to serve our own needs. How do you reconcile those two things? Keystone would make us even more dependent on the United States. You're pitching the opposite. How does that make sense?
So I won't go into the Keystone project, because this is a decision for the Prime Minister to make. But what I can tell you, though, is that we need major projects across the country to be able to support our steel industry and to be able to support our auto industry. And when it comes to certain natural resources, we have them in abundance, and we can, work on being able to benefit from the fact that we have so many of these resources. At the same time, there are some that are extremely strategic, including, for example, critical minerals. And we know that Canada has an edge, that we need to attract capital investments in these mining sectors, critical mining sectors, but at the same time that we be very mindful of what we're doing, because obviously there's an entire world competition for accessing these critical minerals.
Every time the Keystone XL pipeline is brought up, these ministers deflect away instantly. They don't want to talk about it. Honestly, whenever any pipeline project is brought up, they don't want to talk about it. And it's strange how the Minister of Industry doesn't want to dive in and talk about one of our most important industries, the oil and gas sector.
What I presented this week was a strategy, Vashi, that was about protecting jobs, obviously in the tariff sectors, and you and I just talked about it: steel, aluminum, auto, copper, and lumber. But also, while there's lots of unpredictability in this world, while we're living in a much more complicated and dangerous world, we will be able also to create jobs. And also we'll be able, and that's the third pillar of the strategy, to attract talent and attract investments. And how will we create jobs for our viewers at home right now that are asking themselves, how can we do so? Well, there are a lot of things we can't control, particularly geopolitics, but there are things we can control, and we can invest in defense. That's what we're doing. We'll have a defense industrial strategy to create jobs in the manufacturing sector for construction people, welders, for researchers, for engineers, architects. So lots of people, thousands of jobs through these defense investments. We'll invest in major projects. We've already announced the latest round of projects, including the LNG second phase in BC, the Port of Montreal, the Darlington Small Modular Reactor for nuclear energy in Ontario, and that will generate thousands of jobs And finally, we will build strong Canadian companies.
But you and your cabinet colleagues, the Prime Minister, have often, particularly let's take the example of defense procurement, talked about spending 75 cents on the dollar right now in the United States. And I guess my question is, it feels as though there's two different messages going on. We might invest more, we might become more interdependent on defense and security and energy with the United States, but also we're supposed to make ourselves whole through this other policies, other suite of policies that we're going to pursue. How can those two things be true at once? And will your government articulate something we can hold you accountable to? By this point, we will be this much diversified, or we will have built out this much additional defense industrial capacity. Because right now you're making a lot of promises without a lot of specifics.
Well, we've made very specific that we would be increasing 2% of our GDP in defense by the end of this year, and that's $9 billion more. We all need that, because if one day Canada is not is basically facing many threats, we need to be able to defend ourselves. So that's what we're working on, and that's where you'll see a lot of investments being done. And we are over-dependent on the US. We know that. So we take stock of that, and we will make sure to do the right investments. But there is indeed, I think it's important to remember that we won't have the same relationship with US. We will diversify our markets, but at the same time, we're still the neighbor of the US, and that will be a reality that we will continue to do trade with US. That's just the reality of being neighbors and our geography.
Well, I'm glad to know Melanie Joly knows basic geography. My God, this is embarrassing.
And our geography.
And as far as the first part of what you just explained, right, and the content of, for example, the policy that you announced, when will Canadians, and I acknowledge, you're 6 months in, but you're making very distinct promises about a time of crisis, which is the way that your government and the Prime Minister have characterized the moment that we're in. When will Canadians begin to see the benefits? Because right now we've got GDP data out of the second quarter that shows our economy versus other countries in the G7 is contracting at the fastest pace. You've got exports to other places in the world outside of the U.S. for a third month in a row declining. Growth in wages has slowed to the worst rate since 2016 outside of 2020 and COVID. So my question against the backdrop of all those very alarming statistics for a number of Canadians is when will they start to see the benefits of what you're pitching?
Well, I think you have to look at the Friday numbers of jobs. 60,000 new jobs created across the country. We're increasing wages by 3.3% over a year to year in July. So things are not perfect. I'm not saying that. I'm very realistic. But hey, we're facing so much unpredictability, and we are actually facing these headwinds in a strong position. And the September numbers are extremely good news. So I think we should be optimistic. Well, there is bumps and while we're flying this plane, we're holding strong and we're going ahead.
The unemployment rate, though, is still 7.1%, which is a multi-year record. I acknowledge that there were far more jobs added last month than anticipated, but that's still a very high unemployment rate. The youth unemployment rate is at a decades level high.
But I'm just saying, we just increased by 60,000 jobs in a month. So I think it shows that it's moving.
They were clearly having some sort of technical difficulties throughout that entire interview. It was cut all to hell, and that was not one single shot. I find it funny how Vashi mentioned accountability, holding the government to some sort of date to get something done. Well, they've done that numerous times, and dates have been pushed back and changed, and still nothing has come from this government. They continue to gaslight people and shift the goalposts to make it seem like everything is fine, when in reality, the economy is currently shrinking. Anyway, I would like to know what you think down in the comment section below, and have a good one.